Before we begin this incredible story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and let us know what you think true love really means. Enjoy the story. The rain hammered against the windows of the small coffee shop like nature's own percussion section, each drop creating rivulets that distorted the neon lights of downtown Seattle into abstract watercolor paintings. Inside the warm sanctuary of grind coffee, the scent of freshly roasted beans mingled with the quiet desperation that seemed to cling to 27-year-old Emma Chen like a second skin. She sat hunched over her laptop in the corner booth, surrounded by a fortress of crumpled napkins, empty sugar packets, and the remnants of what had once been her third cup of coffee that day. Her dark hair fell in waves around her face, hiding the tears that threatened to spill as she stared at the numbers on her screen. No matter how many times she recalculated, the math remained brutally simple. She was 3 months behind on her rent, her student loan payments were in default, and her father's medical bills continued to pile up like autumn leaves in a windstorm. Emma's fingers trembled as she opened yet another email from the collection agency, the harsh language demanding immediate payment for her father's cancer treatment, burning into her retinas. 6 months ago, she had been a promising graduate student in art therapy, working toward her master's degree while volunteering at the Children's Hospital. Then her father's diagnosis had turned her world upside down, forcing her to drop out of school and take on 3 part-time jobs just to keep their heads above water. The coffee shop door chimed, letting in a gust of cold air and a figure that seemed to command attention without trying. Emma glanced up briefly and felt her breath catch in her throat. The man who had just entered looked like he had stepped out of a magazine spread for expensive watches or luxury cars. Tall and broad-shouldered, with perfectly styled dark hair and a charcoal gray coat that probably cost more than Emma made in 6 months. He carried himself with the quiet confidence that only came from never having to worry about money. Damien Cross surveyed the coffee shop with the calculating gaze of someone who was used to assessing value in everything he encountered. At 32, he had built Cross Enterprises from a small tech startup into a multinational corporation, earning him a spot on Forbes' list of youngest billionaires 3 years running. But success had come at a price, and that price was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. His steel blue eyes swept across the crowded coffee shop until they landed on the young woman in the corner booth. She was beautiful in an understated way, with delicate features and an air of vulnerability that made something tighten in his chest. More importantly, she looked exactly like what he needed. Someone genuine, someone desperate enough to agree to his proposition, and someone who wouldn't get ideas about making their arrangement permanent. Emma tried to focus on her laptop screen as the intimidating stranger approached her table, but his presence seemed to fill the entire corner of the coffee shop. When he stopped directly beside her booth, she looked up reluctantly, meeting eyes that were the color of storm clouds and just as turbulent. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep and cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I couldn't help but notice that you seem to be having some financial difficulties." Emma's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and anger. "I'm sorry, but that's really none of your business." "Actually," Damien said, sliding uninvited into the seat across from her, "it might be exactly my business. My name is Damien Cross, and I have a proposition that could solve both of our problems." Emma's eyes widened as she recognized the name. Everyone in Seattle knew who Damien Cross was, even if they had never seen him in person. His company's logo was plastered across half the buildings downtown, and his face regularly appeared on business magazine covers with headlines about his latest acquisition or charitable donation. "What kind of proposition?" Emma asked warily, her instincts telling her to run while her desperate circumstances kept her glued to the vinyl seat. Damien leaned back, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. "I need a wife for 30 days. You need money. It's a simple business transaction. Emma's mouth fell open. Are you insane? Quite sane, actually. My grandfather's will contains a clause that requires me to be married before my 33rd birthday in order to inherit his portion of the company stock. Without that stock, I'll lose controlling interest in Cross Enterprises to my cousin Marcus, who would rather sell the company for parts than continue building it. So, get married for real, Emma said, still reeling from the audacity of his proposal. Marriage is a luxury I can't afford, Damien replied matter-of-factly. I don't have time for romance or relationships, and I certainly don't want some opportunistic socialite thinking she's hit the jackpot. What I need is a temporary business arrangement with someone who understands the terms and won't develop unrealistic expectations. Emma stared at him as if he had sprouted a second head. You're talking about fraud. I'm talking about a mutually beneficial contract. 30 days as my wife, complete with all the public appearances and social obligations that entails. In exchange, I'll pay you $1 million and take care of any outstanding debts you might have. The number hit Emma like a physical blow. $1 million would pay for her father's treatment, clear her student loans, and give her the financial freedom to pursue her dreams without the crushing weight of debt. It was more money than she had ever imagined having, enough to change not just her life, but her father's as well. This is crazy, she whispered, but her resolve was already wavering. Crazy profitable, Damien corrected. I've done my research, Emma. Your father needs experimental treatment that your insurance won't cover. Your student loans are in default, and you're facing eviction. This arrangement could solve all of that. Emma's blood ran cold. How do you know about my personal situation? I make it my business to know these things, Damien said simply. I've been watching you for 3 days, waiting for the right moment to make my offer. You're intelligent, beautiful, and desperate enough to agree to my terms without trying to renegotiate for emotional complications. The clinical way he described her desperation should have been insulting, but Emma found herself considering his offer with the same practical mindset that had helped her survive the past 6 months. $1 million, 30 days, no emotional complications. What exactly would be expected of me? She asked quietly. Damien's expression softened slightly, perhaps recognizing that he had her hooked. You would move into my penthouse, attend social functions as my wife, and maintain the illusion of a happy marriage for exactly 30 days. After that, we'll have a quiet divorce. You'll receive your payment, and we'll never see each other again. And you're sure this will work? Legally, I mean? I have the best lawyers money can buy. Everything will be completely legitimate, just temporary. Emma looked down at her laptop screen, where the collection agency email still glared at her with its threatening language. Her father's pale face flashed in her mind, along with the doctor's gentle but firm explanation that without the experimental treatment, they were looking at months, not years. I need to think about it, she said finally. Damien reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an elegant business card, along with what looked like a check. My personal number is on the card. The check is for $50,000, a good faith deposit to show that I'm serious about this arrangement. If you decide to accept my offer, deposit the check and call me. If not, consider it payment for your time and discretion. Emma stared at the check, her hands shaking as she read the amount. $50,000, more money than she had ever held in her hands, offered as casually as if he were paying for coffee. Why me? She asked, looking up to meet his intense gaze. You could have any woman in the city. Because any other woman would want more than I'm willing to give, Damien replied, standing up and adjusting his expensive coat. You understand desperation, Emma. That makes you practical. And practical people don't confuse business with emotion. He paused at her table, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You have until tomorrow night to decide. After that, I'll find someone else." With that, he was gone, leaving Emma alone with a $50,000 check and the most impossible decision of her life. That night, Emma sat on the edge of her father's hospital bed, watching him sleep fitfully under the harsh fluorescent lights. At 58, William Chen looked fragile and older than his years, the aggressive cancer treatment having stolen his strength along with his thick black hair. The machine surrounding his bed beeped steadily, a mechanical lullaby that had become the soundtrack to Emma's nightmares. "You should go home and get some rest, sweetheart," her father said softly, his eyes opening to focus on her worried face. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine, Dad," Emma lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," William admitted with a weak chuckle. "But Dr. Morrison says the numbers are improving slightly." Emma nodded, but she knew what her father didn't, that the conventional treatment was only buying them time. The experimental therapy Dr. Morrison had mentioned could potentially cure him, but at a cost that might as well have been asking for the moon. "Emma," her father said gently, reaching for her hand with fingers that felt paper thin, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything, Dad." "If this treatment doesn't work, if I don't make it through this, I need you to promise that you'll go back to school. Finish your degree. Don't let my illness derail your dreams." Tears burned Emma's eyes as she squeezed his hand. "Don't talk like that. You're going to beat this. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But either way, I can't bear the thought of you sacrificing your future for me. Your mother would never forgive me if I let that happen." The mention of her mother, who had died in a car accident when Emma was 16, sent a fresh wave of pain through her chest. Her parents had been devoted to each other, the kind of couple that still held hands after 20 years of marriage and finished each other's sentences. Her father had never remarried, claiming that he had already experienced the love of a lifetime. "I won't sacrifice anything, Dad," Emma said firmly. "We're going to find a way to pay for the experimental treatment. Dr. Morrison thinks you're a perfect candidate." "With what money, sweetheart? We've already mortgaged everything we own." Emma thought about the check folded in her purse, about Damian Cross's cold blue eyes, and his impossible proposition. 30 days as the wife of a billionaire in exchange for enough money to save her father's life. When she put it that way, it didn't seem like much of a choice at all. "Let me worry about the money," Emma said, kissing her father's forehead. "You just focus on getting better." The next morning, Emma found herself standing outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Cross Enterprises, clutching Damian's business card so tightly that her knuckles were white. The building stretched toward the clouds like a modern-day Tower of Babel, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who dared approach. The lobby was a study in expensive minimalism, with marble floors so polished they looked like black mirrors, and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses. Emma felt underdressed in her simple jeans and sweater, acutely aware that she looked like exactly what she was, a struggling graduate student who didn't belong in this world of wealth and power. "May I help you?" asked the receptionist, a perfectly groomed woman who managed to convey polite helpfulness and subtle disdain in the same breath. "I'm here to see Mr. Cross," Emma said, her voice smaller than she intended. "He's expecting me." The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly as she looked Emma up and down with the practiced eye of someone used to evaluating people based on their appearance and finding most of them wanting. "Name?" she asked crisply. "Emma Chen." The woman typed something into her computer, and her expression shifted from skeptical to surprised. "Of course, Miss Chen. Mr. Cross is waiting for you in his office. Take the executive elevator to the 42nd floor." The elevator ride to the top of the building felt like ascending to another world entirely. When the doors opened, Emma found herself in an anteroom that looked more like the lobby of a 5-star hotel than a corporate office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, while expensive furniture and original artwork created an atmosphere of understated luxury. Miss Chen? A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor approached her. "I'm Janet Morrison, Mr. Cross's assistant. He's ready to see you now." Emma followed Janet through a set of double doors into the most impressive office she had ever seen. The space was enormous, with one entire wall made of windows that offered a breathtaking view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. Damien stood with his back to the door, silhouetted against the morning light like a figure from a Renaissance painting. "Emma," he said, turning to face her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I wasn't sure you would come." "I almost didn't," Emma admitted, her voice steadier than she felt. "But you're here," Damien observed, moving to his desk and gesturing for her to take one of the leather chairs positioned in front of it. "Which tells me you've made your decision." Emma sat down carefully, hyper-aware of how the expensive leather seemed to embrace her like a gentle hug. "I have conditions." Damien's eyebrows rose slightly, but he looked more amused than annoyed. "I'm listening." "First, my father's medical bills get paid immediately, including the experimental treatment he needs. Second, I want a legally binding contract that specifies exactly what's expected of me and guarantees my payment, regardless of what happens during these 30 days. And third, once this is over, I want your word that you'll never contact me again." "Done, done, and done," Damien said without hesitation. "Janet has already prepared the contracts based on our discussion yesterday. Your father's medical team will receive a payment authorization within the hour." Emma blinked in surprise. "You were that confident I would agree?" "I was that confident you loved your father," Damien corrected gently. "The rest was just details." Janet appeared as if summoned, carrying a thick folder of documents. "The marriage license has already been processed through expedited channels," she said efficiently. "The ceremony is scheduled for this afternoon at 3 o'clock. The contracts specify all terms and conditions, including the pre-nuptial agreement and divorce paperwork." Emma's head spun as she tried to process how quickly everything was moving. "This afternoon?" "No point in delaying," Damien said pragmatically. "The sooner we begin, the sooner it's over." As Emma read through the contracts, she was struck by how thoroughly Damien had thought through every possible contingency. The document spelled out everything from her public responsibilities as his wife to the confidentiality agreements that would prevent her from ever discussing their arrangement. It was all very professional, very cold, and very final. "Any questions?" Damien asked when she finished reading. Emma looked up at him, this stranger who was about to become her husband, and realized she was about to cross a line that would change everything. "Just one. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want?" For the first time since she had met him, Damien's confident facade slipped slightly. "What I want has nothing to do with it," he said quietly. "This is what I need to do to protect everything I've built." Emma nodded and picked up the pen Janet offered her. As she signed her name on the marriage contract, she couldn't help but wonder what she was really agreeing to, and whether 30 days would be enough time to find out who Damien Cross really was beneath his carefully constructed armor. The wedding ceremony took place in the private chapel of Seattle's most exclusive hotel, a space so opulent it felt more like a museum than a place of worship. Stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns across marble floors, while fresh white orchids adorned every surface in elegant arrangements that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. Emma stood before the full-length mirror in the bridal suite, staring at her reflection in disbelief. The wedding dress Damien had provided fit her perfectly, a masterpiece of silk and lace that hugged her curves in all the right places, while maintaining an air of sophisticated elegance. Her hair had been styled by a team of professionals into an intricate updo adorned with tiny pearls, and her makeup had been applied with such skill that she barely recognized herself. "You look absolutely radiant, dear," said the wedding planner, a perfectly put-together woman named Victoria, who had orchestrated the entire event with military precision. "Mr. Cross has exquisite taste." Emma managed a weak smile, her stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and guilt. In just a few minutes, she would walk down the aisle to marry a man she barely knew, all for money. The rational part of her mind insisted this was just a business transaction, but her heart felt heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Victoria or one of the other wedding staff. Instead, Damien stepped into the room, looking devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. His dark hair had been styled to perfection, and his steel blue eyes seemed to glow against his olive complexion. Emma's breath caught in her throat at the sight of him, her body responding to his presence in ways that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. "The groom isn't supposed to see the bride before the ceremony," Emma said weakly, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in this decidedly abnormal situation. "I've never been one for superstitions," Damien replied, his gaze sweeping over her appreciatively. "Besides, I wanted to give you this." He held out a small velvet box, and Emma's heart skipped a beat as she opened it to reveal the most beautiful diamond necklace she had ever seen. The stones caught the light and threw it back in brilliant flashes, creating tiny rainbows that danced across her skin. "Damien, I can't accept this," Emma protested, even as her fingers itched to touch the gorgeous jewelry. "It's not a gift," he said matter-of-factly, moving behind her to fasten the necklace around her throat. "It's part of your costume for the next 30 days. My wife would be expected to wear jewelry of this caliber." His fingers brushed against the sensitive skin of her neck as he secured the clasp, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool metal of the necklace. Emma caught his eyes in the mirror and saw something flicker there, a heat that contradicted his businesslike tone. "There's something else we need to discuss," Damien said, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Physical intimacy." Emma's cheeks flushed bright red. "The contract specifically states that this marriage won't be consummated." "I'm not talking about sex," Damien clarified, though his voice had grown slightly rougher. "I'm talking about the appearance of intimacy. We'll be in the public eye constantly, and people will be watching for signs that our relationship is genuine. That means we'll need to be comfortable with casual touching, holding hands, the occasional kiss." The thought of kissing Damien made Emma's pulse quicken in ways that were definitely not professional. "I understand," she managed to say. "Do you?" Damien asked, his hands tightening slightly on her shoulders. "Because once we walk out of this room, you won't just be Emma Chen anymore. You'll be Emma Cross, my wife, the woman I supposedly love enough to marry. That performance has to be convincing." Emma turned to face him, suddenly struck by how close they were standing. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her want to lean closer. "And what about you? Will you be able to convincingly play the part of a man in love?" Something dark and unreadable flickered in Damien's eyes. "I'm very good at playing whatever role the situation requires," he said quietly. Before Emma could respond, Victoria's voice called from outside the door. 5 minutes, everyone." Damien stepped back, the moment of intimacy broken as effectively as if someone had thrown cold water on them both. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his professional mask sliding back into place. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was about to happen. "As ready as I'll ever be." The chapel was filled with an intimate gathering of about 50 people, all carefully selected to represent Damien's social and business circles. Emma recognized a few faces from magazine covers and news reports, powerful people whose presence would lend credibility to their sudden marriage. She wondered what they really thought about Damien's surprise bride, whether they saw through the carefully constructed facade. As the wedding march began to play, Emma walked down the aisle alone, having no family or friends to share this moment with her. Her father was too ill to attend, and she hadn't told him the truth about her arrangement with Damien, simply saying that she had found a solution to their financial problems. Damien stood at the altar, looking every inch the successful businessman, his posture confident and his expression composed. But as Emma approached, she caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that made her realize he might be just as nervous as she was. The ceremony itself was brief and professional, more like a business meeting than a celebration of love. The officiant spoke about commitment and partnership in terms that could have applied to a corporate merger just as easily as a marriage. When it came time to exchange vows, Damien and Emma recited the traditional words with careful precision, their voices steady but lacking the emotion that should have accompanied such promises. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant announced, and Emma felt her heart stop. Damien stepped closer, his hands coming up to cup her face gently. "Trust me," he whispered, so quietly that only she could hear. Then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and surprisingly tender. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it sent electricity through Emma's entire body, making her forget for a moment that this was all just an act. When they broke apart, she saw her own confusion reflected in Damien's eyes, as if he too had been affected by the unexpected intimacy. The reception was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, a space that glittered with crystal chandeliers and gold accents. Emma found herself swept into a whirlwind of introductions and conversations, playing the role of the blushing new bride, while Damien remained at her side like a protective shadow. "How did you two meet?" asked Mrs. Pemberton, the wife of one of Damien's business partners, her sharp eyes assessing Emma with obvious curiosity. "It was very romantic," Damien answered smoothly, his arm tightening around Emma's waist. "Love at first sight, you might say." "How wonderful," Mrs. Pemberton replied, though her tone suggested she found the story less than convincing. "And what do you do, dear?" "I'm studying art therapy," Emma said, grateful for the truth after so many lies. "I want to work with children who have experienced trauma." "How noble," the older woman said with condescending sweetness. "It must be nice to have hobbies." Emma felt her temper flare at the dismissive tone, but before she could respond, Damien's hand moved to the small of her back in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. "Emma's work is hardly a hobby," he said coolly, his voice carrying just enough edge to make Mrs. Pemberton's smile falter. "She's incredibly talented and passionate about helping others." I admire her dedication. The sincerity in his voice surprised Emma almost as much as his defense of her career. For a moment, she almost forgot that he was acting, that his protection and praise were just part of the performance they were putting on for their audience. The penthouse apartment that was to be Emma's home for the next 30 days was a testament to wealth and impeccable taste, occupying the entire top floor of one of Seattle's most exclusive residential buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city, while the interior design spoke of understated luxury in every carefully chosen detail. Emma stood in the marble foyer, still wearing her wedding dress, feeling completely out of place in this temple to success. The space was beautiful but cold, like a museum exhibit rather than a home where people actually lived and laughed and loved. "Your room is down this hall," Damien said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space as he led her through the apartment. "You'll have complete privacy and your own bathroom. Janet has already arranged for a wardrobe appropriate for your new role." He opened the door to reveal a bedroom that was larger than Emma's entire studio apartment, decorated in soothing shades of cream and gold, with a king-sized bed that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. A sitting area by the windows included a small desk and comfortable reading chair, while double doors led to what Emma could see was an enormous walk-in closet. "This is beautiful," Emma said softly, running her fingers along the silk duvet. "But it doesn't feel very lived in." "That's because no one has ever lived in it," Damien admitted, leaning against the doorframe. "I had the interior designer create a guest suite, but I've never actually had any guests." "That sounds lonely," Emma observed, and immediately wished she could take the words back when she saw Damien's expression close off. "Loneliness is a luxury I can't afford," he said curtly. "I have a company to run, and responsibilities that require my complete focus." Emma wanted to ask him when he had decided that human connection was incompatible with success, but something in his posture warned her not to push. Instead, she moved to the window and looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "I mean, how do we live together for 30 days without driving each other crazy?" "We establish boundaries and stick to them," Damien replied, though he had moved closer to the window and was now standing just behind her. "We're both adults who understand that this is a business arrangement. As long as we remember that, there shouldn't be any complications." Emma turned to face him, struck by how the fading light from the window seemed to soften his sharp features. "And what about when we're in public? How do we make people believe we're actually in love?" "We focus on the details," Damien said, his voice dropping to a lower register that made something flutter in Emma's stomach. "Couples in love have their own language of small gestures and shared looks. We'll need to develop that." "Like what?" Damien stepped closer, close enough that Emma could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Like this," he said, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was simple and innocent, but the way his fingers lingered against her skin made Emma's breath catch. "And this," he continued, letting his hand trail down to rest against her neck, his thumb brushing gently over her pulse point. Intimate touches that suggest familiarity and affection. Emma's heart was racing now, and she was certain Damien could feel it beneath his thumb. "That's very convincing," she managed to say. "It has to be," Damien replied, but his voice had grown rougher, and Emma could see something shifting in his eyes as he looked down at her. For a moment, they stood frozen in that tableau, the fake husband and wife discovering that the line between performance and reality was thinner than either of them had expected. Then Damien stepped back abruptly, his professional mask sliding back into place. "You should get some rest," he said briskly. "We have a full schedule tomorrow. Janet will brief you over breakfast about the social obligations for the rest of the week." He was gone before Emma could respond, leaving her alone in the beautiful, sterile bedroom, with her heart still racing and her skin tingling where he had touched her. The next morning, Emma woke to the smell of fresh coffee and something delicious cooking in the kitchen. She pulled on a silk robe that had been hanging in the enormous closet and padded barefoot through the apartment, following the enticing aromas. She found Damien standing at the stove, dressed in dark jeans and a white button-down shirt that was rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him, almost domestic, and Emma felt a strange flutter of attraction at the sight of this powerful man making breakfast. "You cook?" she asked, settling onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. "I had to learn when I was younger," Damien replied, not looking up from the pan where he was expertly preparing what appeared to be Eggs Benedict. "My parents traveled frequently for business, and the housekeeper didn't live in." Emma tried to imagine Damien as a lonely child, fending for himself in some version of this sterile apartment, and felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. That must have been difficult. "It taught me to be self-sufficient," Damien said with a shrug, plating the eggs with the same precision he probably brought to business negotiations. Independence is a valuable skill. So is connection, Emma countered gently. Humans aren't meant to be entirely self-sufficient. Damien set a plate in front of her, and Emma was surprised by how perfectly the eggs were prepared, the hollandaise sauce rich and creamy. "This is incredible," she said after taking a bite. "Thank you." Damien poured coffee from an expensive-looking machine, adding cream to Emma's cup without asking how she liked it. The fact that he had already learned her preferences after just one day together felt oddly intimate. "So what's on the agenda for today?" Emma asked, trying to focus on practical matters rather than the way the morning light streaming through the windows highlighted the strong lines of Damien's jaw. "Lunch with my board of directors and their wives," Damien said, settling onto the stool across from her. "Then a charity gala tonight. Both events will be photographed extensively, so we need to look convincing as a couple." Emma nodded, though the thought of being scrutinized by photographers and society reporters made her stomach clench with anxiety. "Any specific advice for surviving these things?" "Stay close to me, smile frequently, and let me do most of the talking," Damien said. "These people can sense weakness, and they'll use any perceived vulnerability against you." "Against me or against you?" Emma asked perceptively. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. "My cousin Marcus will almost certainly be at both events tonight. He's been circulating rumors about my personal life for months, trying to undermine my credibility with the board. Our marriage has to look absolutely genuine, or he'll find a way to use it against me." Emma set down her coffee cup, studying Damien's face carefully. "What exactly did your grandfather's will say about the marriage requirement?" "That I had to be married before my 33rd birthday, and remain married for at least 6 months to qualify for the inheritance," Damien replied. "Marcus is hoping I'll fail to meet the deadline, which would give him enough voting shares to oust me as CEO. And your 33rd birthday is 29 days from now." Emma felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the true stakes of their arrangement. This wasn't just about Damien protecting his company. It was about his entire life's work potentially being stolen by someone who wanted to destroy everything he had built. "Why didn't you just find someone to marry for real?" Emma asked quietly. "Surely there are women in your social circle who would be interested in becoming Mrs. Cross permanently." Damien's expression hardened. "Because real marriage requires real emotions, and emotions are a weakness I can't afford. What I need is a business partner, not a wife. What I need is someone who won't confuse our arrangement with something it's not." The words stung more than Emma expected, reminding her forcefully that, despite the intimate moments and tender gestures, Damien saw her as nothing more than a convenient solution to his problem. She was just another acquisition, a tool to be used and discarded once she had served her purpose. The lunch with Damien's board of directors took place at the city's most exclusive country club, where old money met new money in an atmosphere of carefully cultivated elegance. Emma sat beside Damien at a table overlooking the golf course, wearing a simple but expensive navy dress that Janet had selected for her, feeling like an actress who had forgotten her lines. "Emma, dear, you must tell us how you managed to capture our Damien's heart," said Catherine Whitfield, the wife of the board chairman, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "We all thought he was married to his work." "Still am," Damien said smoothly, his hand finding Emma's on the table and intertwining their fingers. "I just finally found someone worth making time for." The casual intimacy of his touch sent warmth shooting up Emma's arm, even though she knew it was all for show. She forced herself to smile as if she were a woman blissfully in love rather than someone playing a very expensive role. "How romantic," Catherine continued, though her eyes remained calculating. "And where did you two meet?" Emma opened her mouth to respond, but Damien squeezed her hand gently in warning. They had rehearsed this story that morning, but under the scrutiny of these powerful women, Emma's mind went blank. At the art gallery downtown, Damien said easily. Emma was there for a charity auction supporting children's art therapy programs. I was immediately struck by her passion for helping others. Art therapy, murmured another woman, whose name Emma had already forgotten. How interesting. The condescension in her tone was unmistakable, and Emma felt her temper begin to rise. These women seemed to view her charitable interests as quaint hobbies rather than meaningful work, and their thinly veiled disdain was becoming harder to ignore. It's actually quite rewarding, Emma said, finding her voice at last. Children who have experienced trauma often struggle to express their emotions verbally. Art gives them a safe way to process their feelings and begin healing. I'm sure it does, dear, Catherine said dismissively, before turning her attention back to Damien. Speaking of children, I imagine you'll be starting a family soon. Your grandfather would have been so pleased to see the cross name continue. Emma felt Damien tense beside her, his grip on her hand tightening almost painfully. The mention of children seemed to have hit a nerve, and she found herself wondering what old wounds Catherine had just reopened. We're focusing on our marriage right now, Damien said coolly. Everything else can wait. Of course, Catherine agreed, but her smile suggested she had filed away his reaction for future use. Young love should be savored. The conversation moved on to safer topics, like upcoming charity events and vacation plans. But Emma noticed that Damien remained tense throughout the remainder of the meal. When they finally escaped to his car, she couldn't help but ask about his reaction to Catherine's comment. You looked like she had hit you when she mentioned children, Emma observed, as they drove through downtown Seattle. Catherine Whitfield has a talent for finding people's pressure points and pushing them, Damien replied tersely. It's how she's managed to stay relevant in society circles for 30 years. But why would the topic of children be a pressure point for you? Damien was quiet for so long that Emma thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he pulled into the parking garage beneath his building and turned off the engine before speaking. Because I don't want children, he said flatly. I never have, and I never will. And in my social circle, that makes me an anomaly. Emma studied his profile in the dim light of the garage. Never? Not even if you found someone you really loved? Love is a luxury, remember, Damien said, echoing his earlier words. And children are a responsibility I'm not willing to accept. I've seen what happens when parents put their own ambitions ahead of their children's needs. I won't perpetuate that cycle. The pain in his voice suggested personal experience, and Emma found herself wanting to ask more questions. But before she could, Damien was already getting out of the car, effectively ending their conversation. The charity gala that evening was held at the Seattle Art Museum, with the city's elite mingling among priceless paintings and sculptures, while champagne flowed freely and photographers captured every moment for the society pages. Emma wore a stunning emerald green gown that hugged her curves and made her feel like a different person entirely, someone who belonged in this world of wealth and privilege. You look incredible, Damien said, as they posed for photographers on the red carpet, his arm around her waist in a gesture that looked possessive and loving. So do you, Emma replied, and it wasn't just part of their act. Damien in a perfectly tailored tuxedo was devastating, all sharp angles and masculine elegance that made her pulse quicken despite her efforts to remain professional. They moved through the party like a practiced couple, Damien introducing Emma to various dignitaries and business associates, while she played the part of the devoted wife. She was beginning to understand the rhythm of these events, the careful dance of social politics that determined who spoke to whom and in what order. Damien, a smooth voice interrupted their conversation with a museum board member. What a surprise to see you here with a date. Emma turned to see a man who looked enough like Damien to be his brother. Though where Damien's features were sharp and controlled, This man's face held a cruel handsomeness that made her instantly wary. "Marcus," Damien said coolly, his arm tightening protectively around Emma. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Emma." Marcus Cross looked Emma up and down with the same calculating gaze she had seen from the board members' wives earlier, as if he were assessing her value and finding it lacking. "Wife?" Marcus said with exaggerated surprise. "How delightfully sudden. When exactly did this wedding take place?" "Yesterday," Damien replied without missing a beat. "We wanted to keep it private." "How romantic," Marcus said, his tone suggesting he found it anything but. "And what was your maiden name, Emma?" "Chen," Emma replied, lifting her chin defiantly as she saw the flash of calculation in Marcus's eyes. "Chen," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Not a name I recognize from our usual social circles. How did you two meet?" Emma felt Damien's hand press against her back in warning, but she was tired of being treated like an outsider and a fraud. "At a coffee shop, actually," she said truthfully. "Sometimes the best connections happen in the most unexpected places." "Indeed they do," Marcus agreed, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Well, I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other in the coming weeks. Family is so important, don't you think?" The threat in his words was subtle but unmistakable, and Emma felt a chill run down her spine as Marcus melted back into the crowd. She had just made an enemy, and something told her that Marcus Cross was not the kind of man who forgot slights or failed to take advantage of weaknesses. "That went well," Damien said dryly once they were alone again. "He's going to investigate me, isn't he?" Emma asked, already knowing the answer. "Probably before the night is over," Damien confirmed. "Marcus has resources and connections that he's not afraid to use. We need to be prepared for him to dig into your background." Emma felt panic begin to rise in her chest. What if he finds out about our arrangement? What if someone saw us at the coffee shop or remembers me from the hospital? Damien turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face in a gesture that looked tender and romantic to anyone watching, but allowed him to speak quietly in her ear. "Then we make sure our story is more compelling than whatever truth he thinks he's uncovered," Damien said firmly. "We make sure that everyone who sees us together believes completely in our love story." The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and oddly intoxicating. Emma found herself swept into Damien's world of business lunches and charity galas, gallery openings, and exclusive dinner parties, each event requiring her to play the part of the devoted wife with increasing skill and decreasing effort. During the days, she accompanied Damien to his office, ostensibly to help with charitable foundation work, but really to maintain the appearance of a couple who couldn't bear to be apart. She had been given her own office down the hall from his, a beautiful space with a view of the harbor where she could work on legitimate projects while staying close enough to play her role when needed. "Mrs. Cross," Janet said one morning, appearing in Emma's doorway with her usual professional smile. "Mr. Cross would like to see you in his office." Emma had grown accustomed to the name, though it still sent a little thrill through her every time someone used it. She made her way down the hall to find Damien standing at his floor-to-ceiling windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the city below. "You wanted to see me?" Emma asked, settling into one of the leather chairs in front of his massive desk. "We have a problem," Damien said without turning around. "Marcus has been busy." Emma felt her stomach drop. What kind of busy? Damien finally turned to face her, his expression grim. "He's hired a private investigator to look into our relationship. Someone has been asking questions at the coffee shop where we met, at your father's hospital, even at your old apartment building." "What kind of questions?" Emma asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "About the timeline of our relationship, about your financial situation before we married, about whether anyone had seen us together before our supposed first meeting. Damien moved to sit on the edge of his desk, close enough that Emma could see the concern in his steel blue eyes. He's building a case that our marriage is fraudulent. Emma's hands began to tremble. Can he prove it? Not yet, but he's getting close. The investigator spoke to your former landlord about your eviction notice. He knows you were in serious financial trouble before our marriage. That doesn't prove anything, Emma said desperately. Lots of people have money problems. True, but combined with the sudden nature of our wedding and the fact that no one can remember seeing us together before last month. Damien trailed off, letting Emma draw her own conclusions. Emma buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by the implications. What happens if he can prove our marriage is fake? I lose everything, Damien said simply. The company, the foundation, 20 years of building something meaningful. And you lose your payment, along with your father's medical coverage. The reminder of what was at stake for both of them hit Emma like a physical blow. Her father's treatment was going well, his doctor optimistic about his response to the experimental therapy that Damien's money had made possible. If their arrangement was exposed, not only would she lose the financial security she had been promised, but her father's life would be in jeopardy again. There has to be something we can do, Emma said, looking up at Damien with desperation in her eyes. There is, Damien said quietly, but you're not going to like it. Tell me. Damien moved to the window again, his profile sharp against the bright morning light. We have to make our relationship look more authentic, more intimate. Emma felt heat flood her cheeks. What do you mean? I mean, we have to convince everyone, including Marcus's investigator, that we're not just business partners playing house. We have to look like a couple who are genuinely in love, who can't keep their hands off each other. But the contract specifically states that our marriage won't be consummated, Damien interrupted. It doesn't say anything about public displays of affection or sleeping in the same bedroom. Emma's heart began to race as the implications sank in. You want us to share a bedroom? I want us to look like a married couple who share a bedroom, Damien corrected. If Marcus's investigator manages to get someone inside this building to confirm that we sleep separately, it will be one more piece of evidence that our marriage is a sham. Emma stood up abruptly, moving to the window beside him as she tried to process what he was asking. This wasn't part of our original agreement. Neither was Marcus hiring a private investigator, Damien pointed out. Sometimes circumstances require adaptation. Emma stared out at the city below, watching tiny figures move through the streets like pieces on a chessboard. And you think sharing a bedroom will be enough to convince people we're really married? That, combined with a more convincing public persona, we need to look like we can't get enough of each other. More touching, more intimate conversations, more of the small gestures that couples in love can't help but make. More touching, Emma repeated faintly, her mind immediately going to the way Damien's casual touches during their public appearances had already been affecting her more than they should. Nothing inappropriate, Damien said quickly, as if he could read her thoughts. Just enough to sell the illusion. Emma turned to face him, struck by how close they were standing. She could smell his cologne, see the flecks of darker blue in his steel-gray eyes, notice the slight tension in his jaw that suggested he wasn't as calm about this proposition as he was pretending to be. And you think you can handle that? She asked softly. More intimacy without it becoming complicated? Something flickered in Damien's eyes, gone so quickly that Emma wasn't sure she had really seen it. I'm very good at compartmentalizing, he said, but his voice had grown rougher. So am I, Emma lied, knowing that her feelings for her fake husband were already far more complicated than they should be. Then we're agreed, Damien said, extending his hand, in the same business-like gesture he had used when they first made their deal. Partners in a more convincing performance. Emma looked at his outstretched hand, knowing that shaking it would commit her to playing a game that was becoming more dangerous by the day. Not because of Marcus's investigation, but because every moment she spent pretending to be in love with Damien Cross was making it harder to remember that it was all just an act. Partners, she agreed, taking his hand and trying to ignore the electricity that shot through her at the contact. That evening, Emma stood in the doorway of Damien's bedroom, holding her overnight bag and trying to calm her racing heart. The space was large and masculine, decorated in shades of gray and navy, with modern furniture and the same stunning city views that characterized the rest of the penthouse. "I can take the couch," Damien said, gesturing to the sitting area by the windows, where a leather sectional faced a wall-mounted television. "That seems unnecessarily uncomfortable," Emma replied, surprised by her own boldness. "The bed is enormous. We're both adults. I think we can manage to share it without any incidents." Damien's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you sure about that?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them seemed willing to address directly. Emma lifted her chin, determined not to let him see how much the prospect of sleeping beside him was affecting her. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Besides, if we're going to convince people we're really married, we need to be comfortable with this level of intimacy." "Intimacy," Damien repeated, as if testing the word on his tongue. "Is that what this is?" Emma felt heat flood her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "It's what we're pretending it is." Sharing a bedroom with Damien proved to be both easier and more difficult than Emma had expected. Easier because they fell into a natural routine of taking turns in the bathroom and carefully maintaining their respective sides of the enormous bed. More difficult because Emma found herself hyper-aware of every sound Damien made, every shift in the mattress, every quiet breath in the darkness. The first night, she lay rigidly on her side of the bed, clutching her pillow and trying to ignore the warm, masculine presence just feet away from her. Damien seemed to have no such troubles, his breathing evening out into the rhythm of deep sleep within minutes of his head hitting the pillow. Emma, on the other hand, stared at the ceiling for hours, her mind racing with thoughts she had no business thinking about her fake husband. She found herself wondering what his skin would feel like under her hands, whether his lips would be as soft as they had looked during their brief wedding kiss, what it would be like to wake up in his arms for real rather than as part of an elaborate charade. By the third night, the tension had become almost unbearable. Emma was exhausted from lack of sleep, and her body was responding to Damien's proximity in ways that made her feel like a teenager with an inappropriate crush. "You're not sleeping," Damien observed quietly, as Emma shifted restlessly beside him. "Neither are you, apparently," Emma replied, rolling over to face him in the darkness. The moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows provided just enough illumination for her to see his profile against the white pillows. His dark hair was tousled from sleep, making him look younger and more vulnerable than his usual controlled demeanor allowed. "I'm a light sleeper," Damien said. "Occupational hazard of running a company. Too many late-night crisis calls." "Is that why you've never been married before?" Emma asked impulsively. "Because your work doesn't leave room for relationships?" Damien was quiet for so long that Emma thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and thoughtful. "I was engaged once," he said. 5 years ago. Her name was Victoria Ashworth, and she was everything my parents thought I should want in a wife. Beautiful, well-educated, from the right family. Emma felt an unexpected stab of jealousy at the thought of Damien with another woman, which was ridiculous, considering their entire relationship was built on a business contract. "What happened?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "She wanted things I couldn't give her," Damien replied. "Emotional availability, romantic gestures. the kind of love that makes people write poetry and believe in forever. I tried to be what she needed, but in the end, she realized that I was more committed to Cross Enterprises than I ever would be to her. Maybe you just hadn't found the right person yet, Emma suggested gently. Damien turned to face her, and suddenly they were much closer than Emma had realized. She could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin, see the complex emotions flickering in his eyes. Maybe I'm not capable of being the right person for anyone, he said quietly. Maybe some people are just meant to focus on building things rather than building relationships. Emma's heart ached for the loneliness she could hear beneath his words. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. I don't believe that, she whispered. I think you're capable of much more than you give yourself credit for. For a moment, they lay frozen like that, Emma's hand against Damien's face, while they stared into each other's eyes in the darkness. The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity, and Emma could feel herself being drawn into something that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. Then Damien caught her wrist gently, removing her hand from his face, but not letting go of her fingers. Emma, he said, her name a warning on his lips. I know, she whispered, understanding what he couldn't say, that this was dangerous territory, that they were supposed to be pretending, that getting emotionally involved would complicate everything. But knowing didn't make the pull between them any less powerful. If anything, the forbidden nature of what she was feeling made it even more intense. We should get some sleep, Damien said finally, though he made no move to release her hand. Yes, Emma agreed, though she found herself memorizing the feel of his fingers intertwined with hers. They lay like that for a long time, holding hands in the darkness, while carefully maintained barriers began to crack around them. When Emma finally drifted off to sleep, it was with Damien's thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm, and the dangerous realization that she was falling in love with a man who had made it clear that love was not part of their deal. The next morning brought new challenges in the form of a society reporter who had somehow gained access to their building and was asking pointed questions about the Cross marriage. Janet handled the situation with her usual efficiency, but the incident served as a reminder that they were constantly under scrutiny. We need to be more careful, Damien said, as they sat in his office reviewing the day's schedule. Marcus is clearly escalating his efforts to find cracks in our story. Emma nodded, though her attention was divided between his words and the memory of how it had felt to fall asleep holding his hand. The intimacy they had shared in the darkness felt both more real and more dangerous than any of their public performances. There's something else we need to discuss, Damien continued. The quarterly board meeting is next week, and you'll be expected to attend the dinner afterward. It's going to be our biggest test yet. What makes it different from the other events we've attended? Emma asked, because this time, Marcus will have had 3 weeks to prepare his attack. He'll be looking for any inconsistency in our story, any sign that our relationship isn't genuine. And he'll do it in front of the people who have the power to remove me as CEO. Emma felt a chill of fear run down her spine. What can I do to help? Damien was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. There is one thing, but it's asking a lot of you. Tell me. I need you to let me share something personal about you with the board. Something real and meaningful that will explain why I fell in love with you so quickly. Emma's heart skipped at his casual use of the word love, even though she knew he was just talking about their cover story. What kind of personal information? Your work with art therapy, your father's illness, the fact that you sacrificed your education to take care of him. Damien leaned forward, his expression intense. I want to tell them that I fell in love with your compassion and strength, that meeting you made me realize there were more important things in life than business success. The irony of using her real emotions and experiences to support their fake relationship wasn't lost on Emma. You want to use my actual life story as evidence of our fictional love story? Yes, Damien said without apology. Because the emotions behind it are real, even if the context isn't. When I talk about your compassion and strength, I won't be lying about those qualities. I'll just be lying about why they matter to me. Emma studied his face, looking for any sign of the man who had held her hand in the darkness the night before. But Damien's professional mask was firmly in place, making it impossible to read his true feelings. Okay, she said finally. If you think it will help protect what you've built, you can tell them about my father. Thank you, Damien said softly. And for just a moment, his mask slipped enough for Emma to see genuine gratitude in his eyes. Just promise me something, Emma added, surprising herself with her boldness. What? Promise me that when this is all over, when we go our separate ways, you'll remember that the emotions were real, even if the relationship wasn't. Promise me that you'll let yourself believe, even for a little while, that someone could love you for who you are rather than what you can provide. Damien stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his steel blue eyes. Emma, promise me, she insisted, though her voice was barely above a whisper. I promise, he said finally, though his voice sounded strained, as if the words had cost him something. Emma nodded, satisfied that she had planted a seed of possibility in his carefully controlled world. She might not be able to keep him, but maybe she could help him believe that he was worthy of being kept by someone else, someday. The board dinner took place at the most exclusive private club in Seattle, a bastion of old money and older traditions, where women had only been allowed as members for the past decade. Emma wore a midnight blue gown that clung to her curves and made her feel like she was wearing liquid starlight, while diamond earrings that Damien had given her caught the light from the crystal chandeliers. You look stunning, Damien said, as they walked up the marble steps to the club's entrance, his hand warm and reassuring at the small of her back. I feel like I'm about to walk into a lion's den, Emma admitted, her nerves showing despite her efforts to appear calm. You are, Damien replied with brutal honesty. But you're not walking in alone. Whatever happens tonight, we face it together. The word, together, sent a warm flutter through Emma's chest, even though she knew he was simply talking about their business partnership. Over the past 3 weeks, she had become dangerously attached to the idea of being part of a team with Damien, of facing the world as united front. The private dining room was filled with the most powerful people in Seattle's business community, men and women who controlled billions in assets and made decisions that affected thousands of jobs. Emma recognized most of them from previous events, though tonight the atmosphere felt more charged, more predatory. Marcus Cross stood near the bar, impeccably dressed and surrounded by a small group of board members who hung on his every word. When he saw Damien and Emma enter, his smile was sharp enough to cut glass. The happy couple, Marcus announced, raising his champagne flute in a mock toast. Looking as radiant as ever, Emma felt Damien tense beside her, but his expression remained neutral as he guided her toward their assigned seats at the head table. The placement was clearly intentional, putting them on display for the entire room while ensuring that every word they spoke could be overheard by multiple people. Ladies and gentlemen, said Harold Pemberton, the board chairman, as the first course was served. Before we begin our meal, I'd like to congratulate Damien and Emma on their recent marriage. It's wonderful to see our CEO so happy. Polite applause rippled around the table, though Emma noticed that Marcus's hands remained conspicuously still. Thank you, Harold, Damien replied smoothly. I have to say, marriage has given me a new perspective on what's truly important in life. Indeed, Marcus interjected, his voice carrying just enough skepticism to plant seeds of doubt. And what insights has matrimony provided? Emma felt her heart begin to race as she realized this was the moment Damien had prepared for, the opportunity to share her personal story in service of their deception. "Emma has taught me that success without compassion is hollow," Damien said, his voice carrying the ring of sincerity. "Before I met her, I measured everything in terms of profit margins and market share. But watching her sacrifice her own education to care for her father during his cancer treatment, it made me realize that some things are more valuable than money." A murmur of interest went around the table as Damien continued, his hand finding Emma's and squeezing gently. She was working 3 jobs and putting herself through graduate school in art therapy when her father was diagnosed. Without hesitation, she dropped out to become his primary caregiver, giving up her dreams so that he could have the best possible chance at survival. Emma felt tears sting her eyes as Damien spoke about her father with genuine respect and admiration. Even though she knew this was performance, the way he honored her sacrifice felt deeply meaningful. "Art therapy," said Catherine Whitfield with interest. "How fascinating. You work with children, don't you, dear?" "I do," Emma managed to say around the tightness in her throat. Children who have experienced trauma often struggle to express their emotions verbally. Art gives them a safe way to process their feelings. "And that's when I knew I had to marry her," Damien said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "The first time I saw her with those children, the way she could reach them when no one else could, I realized I had found someone who could teach me to see the world differently." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he listened to Damien's speech, clearly searching for inconsistencies or false notes. But Emma could see that even he was affected by the genuine emotion in Damien's voice. "How romantic," Marcus said finally, his tone just shy of sarcastic. "And this revelation came to you quite suddenly, didn't it?" "I mean, the engagement was rather brief." "When you know, you know," Damien replied easily, bringing Emma's hand to his lips for a soft kiss. "I wasn't about to let someone that extraordinary slip away." The gesture was simple and sweet, but it sent electricity shooting through Emma's entire body. She caught Damien's eyes over their joined hands and saw something there that made her breath catch, an intensity that seemed far too real for their audience. "Well, we're all thrilled that you found each other," Harold said warmly, clearly buying their performance completely. "And Emma, we'd love to have you more involved in the company's charitable initiatives. Your expertise in art therapy could be invaluable for our youth programs." "I'd be honored," Emma replied, meaning it completely. As the dinner progressed, Emma found herself relaxing slightly. The board members seemed genuinely welcoming, and several of the women engaged her in conversations about her work that felt entirely natural. For the first time since this charade began, she could almost forget that she was playing a role. But Marcus wasn't finished with them yet. "You know," he said during dessert, his voice carrying clearly across the table, "I was just thinking about something. Emma, you mentioned that you dropped out of graduate school to care for your father. That must have been financially devastating." Emma's blood turned to ice as she realized where this was heading. "It was challenging," she said carefully. "I imagine so," Marcus continued with false sympathy. "Student loans, medical bills, lost income from not being able to work full-time. The stress must have been overwhelming." "Emma is remarkably strong," Damien said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Oh, absolutely," Marcus agreed. "I just find it interesting that all of those financial pressures seem to have disappeared so suddenly. Almost overnight, one might say." The table had gone quiet, everyone sensing the undercurrent of accusation in Marcus's words. Emma felt panic begin to rise in her chest as she realized that Marcus knew exactly how desperate her situation had been before she married Damien. "Love has a way of solving all kinds of problems," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Indeed it does," Marcus replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. especially when that love comes with unlimited financial resources. "That's enough, Marcus," Damien said sharply, his protective instincts finally overriding his diplomatic restraint. "I'm simply observing that your bride is a very fortunate woman," Marcus said innocently, "to have found true love at exactly the moment when she needed it most." What are the odds of such perfect timing? Emma could feel the eyes of everyone at the table on her, could sense the doubts that Marcus was deliberately planting. She knew that how she responded in this moment could determine the success or failure of their entire deception. "The odds don't matter when you find the right person," she said quietly, looking directly at Damien as she spoke. "When you meet someone who sees past your circumstances to who you really are, someone who values your dreams and supports your goals, someone who makes you want to be better than you ever thought possible, that's not about timing or luck. That's about recognition." The sincerity in her voice seemed to surprise everyone at the table, including Damien, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Recognition," Damien repeated softly, as if the word held special meaning. "Yes," Emma said, her eyes never leaving his. "Recognizing that you've found your person, the one who understands you completely and loves you anyway." For a moment, the entire dinner party seemed to fade away, leaving just Emma and Damien looking at each other across the table with an intensity that felt far too real for their pretend relationship. The silence that followed Emma's declaration stretched until Catherine Whitfield began to applaud, her eyes bright with romantic delight. The rest of the table quickly joined in, effectively ending Marcus's attempt to undermine their relationship. "How beautifully said, dear," Catherine gushed. "You two are absolutely perfect together." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized how exposed she had made herself with her impromptu speech. Every word had been true, which made them both more convincing and more dangerous. She really did see Damien as someone extraordinary, really did admire his strength and intelligence, really was falling in love with him, despite every rational thought in her head. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and social small talk, but Emma could barely focus on the conversation swirling around her. She kept thinking about the look in Damien's eyes when she had spoken about recognizing your person, the way he had stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "You did perfectly tonight," Damien said, as they rode home in his car, the city lights streaming past the windows like fallen stars. "Did I?" Emma asked quietly, still shaken by how much truth had slipped into her performance. "Marcus completely failed to discredit us. The board is more convinced than ever that our marriage is genuine." Damien glanced at her in the darkness of the car's interior. "That speech you gave about recognition, it was exactly what we needed." Emma nodded, though something in his tone suggested that he was as unsettled by her words as she was. "I'm glad it worked." They lapsed into silence for the rest of the drive, but Emma could feel the tension crackling between them like electricity before a storm. When they reached the penthouse and headed to their shared bedroom, the air felt charged with unspoken possibilities. "Emma," Damien said as she headed toward the bathroom to change into her nightclothes. "Yes," she replied, turning to face him. For a moment, he looked like he was going to say something important, something that might change everything between them. Then his professional mask slipped back into place, and the moment passed. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything you've done to protect what I've built." Emma nodded, swallowing her disappointment that he hadn't said whatever had been in his eyes just moments before. "You're welcome." That night, they lay in their shared bed with careful space between them, both pretending to sleep while hyper-aware of every breath and movement. Emma found herself thinking about what would happen in just over a week when their 30 days were up, when she would take her payment and return to her real life, while Damien went back to his world of corporate meetings and social obligations. The thought of leaving him filled her with an ache that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the impossible feelings she had developed for her temporary husband. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Emma was in her office reviewing applications for the art therapy program she was developing when Janet appeared in her doorway with an expression that Emma had never seen on the composed woman's face before. "Mrs. Cross," Janet said, her voice tight with concern, "there's something you need to see." She handed Emma a tablet displaying a gossip website, and Emma felt the blood drain from her face as she read the headline, "Fake Marriage Scandal. Rocks Cross Empire. Billionaire CEO accused of wedding fraud." The article was devastating in its thoroughness, laying out every detail of Emma's financial situation before her marriage to Damien, complete with documents that should have been private and photos of her at various low-wage jobs. Someone had clearly spent considerable resources digging into her background, and the picture they painted was of a desperate woman who had been bought and paid for by a man seeking to circumvent his grandfather's will. "How did they get this information?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. "Marcus," Janet said grimly. "He's been planning this for weeks. The story is already being picked up by major news outlets." Emma's hands began to shake as she realized the implications. Their carefully constructed facade had been demolished in a single article, and with it, Damien's chances of keeping control of his company. "Where is Damien?" Emma asked, already standing up from her desk. "In an emergency board meeting." They called it an hour ago, right after the story broke. Emma felt panic clawing at her chest as she imagined Damien facing his board of directors alone, trying to defend a relationship that really was built on a business transaction. She had to do something, had to find a way to help him, even if it meant exposing herself to more scrutiny and judgment. "I need to see him," Emma said, already heading for the door. "Emma," Janet called after her, using her first name for the first time in their acquaintance. "The board meeting is private. Even as his wife, you can't just walk in there." "Watch me," Emma said grimly. The boardroom was located on the executive floor, behind heavy oak doors that Emma had never dared to approach before. She could hear raised voices from inside, including Damien's cool tones, attempting to maintain order over what sounded like a room full of very angry people. Emma took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and pushed open the doors. The conversation stopped immediately as every head turned toward her. Damien sat at the head of the long conference table, his face pale but composed, while around him the board members looked like vultures circling a wounded animal. Marcus sat directly across from Damien, his expression one of barely concealed triumph. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt, "but I need to say something." "Emma, you shouldn't be here," Damien said quietly, concern and something that might have been panic flickering in his eyes. "Actually," Marcus said with obvious satisfaction, "I think Emma should absolutely be here. After all, this meeting is partly about her." Emma walked further into the room, every eye following her movement as she approached the conference table. She had never felt more exposed or vulnerable, but she also had never felt more determined to protect the man she loved. "You're right," she said, addressing Marcus directly. "This meeting is about me. It's about whether I married Damien Cross for love or for money, and I think I'm the only person in this room qualified to answer that question." "Mrs. Cross," Harold Pemberton said gently, "perhaps you should discuss this privately with your husband." "No," Emma interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "I want to discuss it right here, right now, in front of everyone." She turned to face the entire board, her chin lifted defiantly despite the tears she could feel threatening behind her eyes. "It's true that I was in desperate financial straits when I met Damien. It's true that marrying him solved my problems and gave me access to resources I never could have imagined. And it's true that our courtship was unusually brief. Murmurs of acknowledgement went around the table, and Emma could see the satisfaction in Marcus's eyes as she appeared to confirm everything in the damaging article. "But what the article doesn't mention," Emma continued, her voice growing passionate, "is that Damien didn't have to marry someone like me to satisfy his grandfather's will. He could have chosen any woman from your social circle, any of the daughters or granddaughters sitting around this table. Women who would have brought him social connections and business advantages that a graduate student from a working-class family never could." The room had gone completely silent, every person hanging on her words. If this marriage was really just a business transaction, wouldn't he have chosen someone who could offer him more than just financial desperation? Wouldn't he have picked a woman who could enhance his reputation instead of potentially damaging it? Emma saw several board members exchange thoughtful glances, her logic clearly resonating with their business-minded approach to problem-solving. "The truth is," Emma said, her voice dropping to a more intimate register as she looked directly at Damien, "I didn't marry him for his money. I married him because he's the most remarkable man I've ever met, because he saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself, because he made me believe that someone like me could deserve someone like him." Damien was staring at her with an expression of wonder and something deeper that made her heart race with dangerous hope. "And if you want to know whether our marriage is real," Emma continued, never breaking eye contact with her husband, "ask yourselves this: would a woman fake the kind of love I feel for that man? Would I put myself through the scrutiny and judgment of this world if I didn't absolutely, completely, desperately adore him?" The silence in the boardroom stretched until it became almost painful, Emma's words hanging in the air like a challenge to everything Marcus had tried to prove. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited for someone to respond, for someone to call her bluff or demand more evidence. But as she looked around the table, Emma realized that something had shifted in the room's dynamics. The board members were no longer looking at her with suspicion or doubt. Instead, their expressions ranged from sympathy to admiration to what appeared to be genuine belief in her declaration of love. "That," said Catherine Whitfield softly, "was either the performance of a lifetime or the most honest thing I've ever heard in this boardroom." "I'm inclined to believe it was the latter," Harold Pemberton added, his voice thoughtful. "Marcus, while your concerns about the timing of Damien's marriage are understandable, I think we need to consider the broader picture here." Marcus's face had gone pale, his triumph evaporating as he realized that Emma's speech had turned the room against him. "But the evidence shows that a young woman was in financial trouble and that marrying Damien solved those problems," Harold interrupted. "It doesn't prove that her feelings aren't genuine or that their relationship is fraudulent." "Furthermore," added another board member, "if we're being honest, most marriages in our social circle involve some element of financial consideration. The combination of love and practical benefits isn't scandalous, it's traditional." Emma felt a rush of relief as she realized that her gamble had paid off. By acknowledging the financial realities of her situation, while emphasizing the emotional truth of her feelings, she had managed to reframe the entire narrative. But it was Damien's reaction that mattered most to her. He was still staring at her, with that expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe what she had just done for him. "I think," Harold said after conferring quietly with several other board members, "that this meeting is over. Marcus, your concerns have been noted and addressed. Damien, congratulations on finding a woman who clearly loves you enough to defend you in front of a room full of strangers." As the board members began to file out of the room, Emma felt her knees go weak with relief and exhaustion. She had just laid her heart bare in front of the most powerful people in Seattle's business community, and somehow it had worked. "Emma." Damien's voice was soft and uncertain as he approached her, his usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. "Did it work?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are they convinced?" "They're convinced," Damien confirmed, but his attention seemed focused entirely on her face rather than on his business victory. "But Emma, what you said in there was what needed to be said," Emma interrupted quickly, not ready to analyze the emotional minefield she had just walked through. "I'm glad it helped." Damien moved closer, close enough that she could see the complex emotion swirling in his steel blue eyes. "You could have let me handle it alone. You could have stayed out of it and collected your payment regardless of what happened to me or the company." "I couldn't do that," Emma said simply. "Why not?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that Emma wasn't sure she was ready to face. "Because I love you," she thought, but didn't say. "Because the thought of you losing everything you've worked for was unbearable. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about money and started being about protecting the man who has become more important to me than my own safety. Because we're partners," she said instead, using the word they had always applied to their business arrangement, but imbuing it with deeper meaning. Damien studied her face for a long moment, and Emma had the distinct impression that he was seeing her differently than he ever had before. Not as the desperate woman he had hired to solve his problem, but as someone who had chosen to stand by him when she could have walked away. "Partners," he repeated softly, as if testing how the words sounded in this new context. They were interrupted by Marcus, who had lingered behind after the other board members left. His face was tight with barely controlled anger, and Emma instinctively moved closer to Damien. "This isn't over," Marcus said, his voice low and threatening. "You may have convinced them today, but I know what this really is. And eventually, I'll prove it." "Marcus," Damien said coolly, though Emma could feel the tension in his body, "I suggest you focus your energy on more productive pursuits. The board has made their position clear." "For now," Marcus replied, "but marriages built on lies don't last. And when yours falls apart, I'll be ready to pick up the pieces." With that ominous promise, he swept out of the boardroom, leaving Emma and Damien alone with the weight of what had just transpired. "He's not going to give up," Emma observed, still shaken by the malice in Marcus's voice. "No, he's not," Damien agreed grimly. "If anything, what happened here today will only make him more determined to find a way to destroy us." Emma felt a chill of fear run down her spine. "What can we do?" Damien was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "We have 7 more days until my birthday. 7 more days until the will's requirements are satisfied. After that, he can investigate all he wants, but it won't matter. The inheritance will be secure." "And then our arrangement ends," Emma said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "Yes," Damien said, but something in his voice suggested the prospect bothered him more than it should have. They stood there in the empty boardroom, both of them aware that they had crossed some invisible line with Emma's impassioned defense of their relationship. The careful boundaries they had maintained for nearly a month had been shattered, leaving them in uncharted territory, where the line between performance and reality had become dangerously blurred. "We should go," Emma said finally, needing to escape the intensity of the moment before she said something she would regret. "Emma, wait," Damien called as she headed for the door. "What you did today, what you said, I need you to know that I—" "Don't," Emma interrupted, turning back to face him with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. "Please don't say anything you don't mean. We have 7 more days to get through, and I need to be able to do that without making this more complicated than it already is." Damien looked like he wanted to argue, to push past the walls she was trying to rebuild between them. But after a moment, he nodded, understanding that they both needed time to process what had just happened. 7 more days, he agreed quietly. As they left the boardroom together, Emma couldn't help but wonder if 7 days would be enough to protect her heart from the inevitable pain of loving a man who had made it clear from the beginning that love was not part of their deal. But she also couldn't ignore the voice in her head that whispered, what if everything had changed? What if the man who had looked at her with such wonder and gratitude was finally ready to admit that some things were more important than business contracts and carefully constructed barriers? 7 more days to find out if the love she had declared in front of a room full of strangers was destined to remain one-sided, or if Damien Cross was finally ready to let someone past his defenses. 7 more days to discover whether their fake marriage could become something real. The remaining 6 days passed in a blur of heightened awareness and careful avoidance. Emma and Damien continued to share a bedroom, continued to attend social functions as the perfect couple, continued to play their roles with increasing skill and decreasing effort. But underneath the familiar routine, something fundamental had shifted between them. Emma found herself studying Damien when she thought he wasn't looking, searching for signs that her declaration in the boardroom had affected him as deeply as it had affected her. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, but he never pushed past the boundaries she had asked him to respect. On the morning of Damien's 33rd birthday, Emma woke to find his side of the bed already empty. She lay there for a moment, listening to the sounds of him moving around in the bathroom, and felt her heart clench with the realization that this was their last day as husband and wife. Tomorrow, the requirements of his grandfather's will would be satisfied. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of dissolving their marriage and returning to their separate lives. Tomorrow, she would take her payment and try to figure out how to live without the man she had fallen in love with. "Happy birthday," she said, when Damien emerged from the bathroom, already dressed in one of his perfectly tailored suits. "Thank you," he replied, but his usual confidence seemed strained, as if he too was feeling the weight of what this day represented. They had breakfast together in comfortable silence, both of them hyper-aware that they were participating in a ritual that would soon end forever. Emma found herself memorizing every detail. The way the morning light caught the dark strands of Damien's hair, the precise way he folded his newspaper, the sound of his coffee cup clicking against the marble countertop. "What would you like to do today?" Damien asked as they prepared to leave for the office. "It's your last day as Mrs. Cross. We should make it memorable." The casual way he mentioned their approaching separation felt like a knife through Emma's heart, but she managed to keep her voice steady as she replied, "Whatever you want to do. It's your birthday, after all." "Actually," Damien said, his voice growing thoughtful, "there's something I've been meaning to show you. Somewhere I'd like to take you before this ends." Something in his tone made Emma look at him more carefully. "Where?" "It's a surprise," Damien said, but his smile seemed forced. "Trust me." Emma felt her heart skip at the question, loaded as it was with layers of meaning they had both been avoiding. "I trust you," she said simply. That afternoon, instead of attending their usual social obligations, Damien drove them out of the city to a small coastal town about an hour north of Seattle. The change of scenery was striking after weeks of urban sophistication, all weathered buildings and fishing boats bobbing in a protected harbor. "What is this place?" Emma asked as they parked near the waterfront. "This is where I come when I need to remember who I am underneath all the business suits and board meetings," Damien said quietly. "I bought a house here 5 years ago, after the engagement with Victoria ended. I wanted somewhere that was completely separate from my corporate life." He led her down a winding path to a small cottage perched on a bluff overlooking the ocean. It was nothing like his sleek penthouse apartment, all weathered cedar and comfortable furniture, and windows that framed the endless blue of the Pacific. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, moving to the wall of windows that faced the water. "I've never brought anyone here before," Damien said, coming to stand beside her. "This place is private, personal. I wasn't sure I should show it to you." "Why did you?" Emma asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his hands shoved deep in his pockets as he stared out at the waves. "Because tomorrow you'll be gone, and I wanted you to know that there's more to me than what you've seen. I wanted you to understand that the man you defended in that boardroom, the man you said you loved, he's not just a creation of Cross Enterprises. He's real, and he exists most fully in places like this." Emma felt tears sting her eyes at the vulnerability in his voice. "Damien, I know what you said about not making things more complicated," Damien interrupted, finally turning to face her. "But I need to tell you something before you leave tomorrow. And I need to tell you here, in the one place where I've never been able to lie to myself." Emma's heart began to race as she saw something shift in Damien's expression, the careful control he always maintained finally beginning to crack. "I know our arrangement was supposed to be purely business," Damien continued, his voice growing rougher with emotion. "I know I hired you to solve a problem, nothing more. But Emma, what you've become to me, what you've made me feel." He trailed off, running his hands through his hair in frustration as he struggled to find words for emotions he had spent years suppressing. "I'm in love with you," he said finally, the words tumbling out as if they had been fighting to escape for weeks. "I'm completely, hopelessly, impossibly in love with you, and I know that wasn't part of our deal. But I can't let you walk away tomorrow without knowing the truth." Emma stared at him in shock, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. "You're in love with me?" she repeated faintly. "I tried not to be," Damien said with a bitter laugh. "I tried to keep things professional, to remember that you were just there to do a job. But watching you navigate my world with such grace and dignity, seeing how you cared for your father, the way you stood up to Marcus and the board members who looked down on you, Emma, you're the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. And I fell in love with you despite every rational thought in my head." Tears were streaming down Emma's face now, her heart soaring with a joy she had never expected to feel. "Damien, I know this changes everything," Damien continued, his words coming faster now, as if he was afraid she would stop him. "I know it makes everything more complicated, but I couldn't let you take your payment and disappear without telling you that these past 30 days haven't been an act for me. Not the important parts. Not the way I feel when you smile at me, or when you fall asleep holding my hand, or when you defend me to people who want to tear me down." Emma closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face in her hands the way she had that night in their shared bed. "You beautiful, stubborn man," she whispered. "Don't you know that I've been in love with you almost from the beginning?" Damien's eyes widened in shock. "You have?" "I tried to fight it," Emma admitted, her thumbs tracing the strong line of his cheekbones. "I told myself it was just gratitude for helping my father, or attraction to your wealth and power. But the truth is, I fell in love with the man who made me coffee on our first morning together. I fell in love with the way you listen when I talk about my dreams, the way you've supported my work without trying to control it. I fell in love with you, Damien Cross, not your money or your company or your social status." "Emma." Damien breathed her name like a prayer, his hands coming up to cover hers where they rested against his face. "I love you," Emma said clearly, wanting him to hear the truth she had been hiding for weeks. "I love your intelligence and your strength and your unexpected kindness. I love the way you've let me see past your armor to the man underneath. And yes, I love you enough to walk away tomorrow if that's what you really want. But I'm hoping." "What are you hoping?" Damien asked softly. "I'm hoping that maybe we don't have to end this," Emma whispered. "I'm hoping that maybe we can find a way to turn this fake marriage into something real." Damien's answer came not in words, but in actions, as he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness they had been holding back for 30 days. It was a kiss that tasted like love and hope and the promise of forever, a kiss that erased the last barriers between them and replaced their careful contract with something infinitely more precious. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing unsteadily, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "No more pretending," he said softly. "No more pretending," Emma agreed. Outside the cottage windows, the sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reflected their joy back at them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new possibilities, but tonight they had each other, and the knowledge that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most impossible circumstances. They had found their real happily ever after, and it was worth more than any contract or payment could ever be. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories, and check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.